Hey, so I'm in Pereira, Colombia right now, and I'm just walking down a side street. Got someone cheering. I'm not sure if you could hear that. It's a pretty busy city. There's a lot of traffic everywhere. It is really beautiful. I don't know if you can see the mountains in the background up there. It's not like the city is crazy busy or anything. It's just that every single area is like at least a little bit busy. So it's a bit tricky to find a good spot to film. Just crossing the street here. I wanted to talk about whether or not it's a good idea to travel to either South America or to Africa. I'm specifically talking to people who are long-term travelers and people who want sort of to choose which larger region to go to for their long-term travels, right? I'd say that with both continents, whichever continent you choose, you're better off picking sort of a region within the continent itself. So you're not going to see the entire African continent. I believe that there are 53 countries, I can't remember. But it is the second biggest continent in the world in terms of landmass and population, after Asia, obviously. So you're better off choosing sort of a general region. So probably Western Africa, Eastern Africa, or Southern Africa would be, that's obviously the most logical choice, because in Northern Africa you can really only visit Morocco and Egypt, right? And then, when it comes to regions in South America, obviously it's a bit more ambiguous, right? But you kind of have this Andean region where you can travel overland from maybe starting in Colombia and making your way through Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. And then of course from there you can go all the way to Chile or Argentina. But I would almost say that Chile and Argentina would be sort of a different category. Hey, what's going on? Hola. I would put them almost as a different category, and I might include Paraguay and Uruguay, although not many people visit those countries. I've kind of been thinking about it recently. I might actually go to Paraguay or Uruguay. So that would be two different categories. We kind of have the northern Andean countries, and then we have the Chile, the more southern countries. And then I would say that Brazil would be a whole region on its own. If you're not aware, Brazil is like absolutely enormous. 1 second. Yeah, Brazil is enormous in terms of population and landmass. So if you're thinking about this sort of long-term trip and you're wondering whether or not it would be a better choice to choose a region within Africa or a region within South America, I'd say definitely you should have some travel experience. I actually started off traveling in Central America and South America, but I definitely, if I were to counsel myself back then, I probably would say to go to Southeast Asia first, or even Europe if I had more money. But nothing happened to me. I was lucky to be totally safe and secure in Central America, which is probably the most dangerous part of the world. That's the first thing. Africa is usually safer than South America. It depends where you go. Oh yeah, that's right. If it is your first time traveling abroad, I would say probably start off, Peru would be pretty reasonable for your first time. Peru or maybe Chile, Argentina, Ecuador. These are all reasonable options. But in general, the Southeast Asia or Europe or North America or East Asia would all be more logical first-time options. Of course, there are some really dangerous African countries, but in general, most of the continent's pretty safe. At least, maybe not the thing. What it is it's the military conflicts versus just street muggings. So there aren't very many street muggings in Africa. There aren't very many just like muggings that happen on the street. You know, you're not very likely to just have someone come up to you with a knife or a gun. I mean, it happens, but not very often in Africa. It doesn't really happen very often anywhere. But of course, it's way more likely to happen in South America, especially where I am right now. They actually have a pretty big problem with that kind of violence. So it just becomes part of your day-to-day life that you're always watching out for that. But it's still never happened to me at any point. Hopefully it doesn't happen mid-video. Another thing is the general development. So in terms of GDP, in terms of economic development overall, in terms of cleanliness, you know, just the economic development of the cities and the towns, South America definitely wins out. Definitely, it's substantially more developed than what you'd find in Africa, for sure. There are some exceptions, like Botswana is the whole southern African region is fairly well developed. Like Botswana's GDP, I think, is above 20,000 USD. I don't remember. It might be around like 18,000 USD. So it's on par with the Czech Republic. It's above a lot of Eastern European countries. And I think it's almost as high as like Italy or Spain or something like that. And there are other Southern African countries that are at that level of overall economic and social development. But then you also get countries that are absurdly poor, like Ethiopia or the Central African Republic. So it's not just poverty, it's also overall development of the country. And of course you can make these arguments about GDP, and I think they're good arguments that GDP isn't a perfect assessment of economic development, but it is a pretty strong indicator. It does seem to be fairly correlated with my experiences. So if a place has a GDP per capita per year of around, I think Ethiopia is around 800 USD. I mean, it's definitely around 800 USD. I just don't remember what it is exactly. You're obviously going to experience a much different standard of living than Colombia. That's around 6,000 USD, right? If they're close to each other, one country could actually be more developed, even if it has a lower GDP. But if they have such like a magnitude of 10 or 100 difference, that is pretty indicative of something, right? In terms of price, South America is in general cheaper, but that really depends where you go. So Brazil, Chile, Argentina, we're talking like European prices above Europe, depending on what part of Europe you're in or what part of Brazil you're in. We're talking pretty high prices. But then in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, here we're talking like real cheap. Like I remember, I think Colombia is maybe even cheaper than when I was here 4 years ago. It seems so insanely cheap. Maybe last time I just wasn't very careful with my money and I spent a lot more money, but like this time everything just seems so crazy cheap. Like it's like on par with, it's like cheaper than the Philippines or cheaper than Southeast Asia or something. I didn't remember that, you know? Especially when you get to a town like Pereira, especially when you get out of Bogota or out of Medellin or out of Cartagena, it's crazy. Like how little money I'm spending. It's weird, it has a reputation as being like a little bit more expensive, but maybe that's just because people come here and you know, they party too much and they spend all their money. I don't know. I'm not sure where the reputation comes from. Okay, so in South, and of course, yeah. So in terms of, oh, this looks like a cool gym. It's called Master Gym. I should have gone to Master. I've got a different one. You can't really see it. That looks neat. Most African countries, if you're not aware of this, they're weirdly expensive. Like, there are some exceptions. Like if you're in a small town, it can be really cheap. But sometimes you end up paying, especially when you're going on like a tour or something. Especially when you're going on you're going on a tour, or you want some kind of Western level amenity, or just generally, not Western, that's the wrong word, like very developed amenities like air conditioning or something like that. It gets crazy expensive, you know? I'm gonna make this crossing here. 1 second. Okay, yeah, so it can be very expensive, especially if you're not used to, traveling. You're gonna have trouble, you have to bargain for everything. And then of course there's some exceptions, like I would say Ethiopia is gonna be the same price as somewhere like Colombia, or maybe even cheaper. Let me think of some other, so we've got safety, we've got costs. Oh yeah, and then of course we have, things to do. And I'm gonna say South America wins. I mean, here's the thing about traveling to Africa that you might be surprised by. And I'm not saying, this is not a criticism, this is absolutely not a criticism, but when you're in a country, when you're in most African countries, you have to go so far to get from one destination to another. Or even it's just like the roads are really bad, so it takes forever. But there just aren't that many attractions. So the best way to do it is you go somewhere and you just stay there and you just enjoy yourself, right? But here in South America, it's like everywhere. There's mountains and waterfalls and cities, and you know, there's all these colonial buildings everywhere, and there's churches, and you know, there's the Amazon, and there's beaches, and they have a lot of that stuff in Africa. They have jungles and beaches and everything, and they have, you know, the beautiful buildings and that, but you have to go so far to get there, right? So you end up like, it makes, if you're going to Africa, you don't go because you're gonna do, like, you're looking for tourist attractions. Because if you did, you would just be spending your whole time in buses, right? You could do that more realistically in South America. Really, Central America or Southeast Asia or Europe are the best parts of the world to go if you're really into the tourist attractions kind of thing, right? Because if you go to even South America, not as much, but if you go to Africa, you end up spending it just so far. And same as like, you know, the United States or Canada, right? If you want to go from one tourist destination to another, you're just spending so long in a bus. So you're better off, if you're going to go to Africa, don't go for the, so South America will win for sure when it comes to things to do. It's just like endless, right? There's tons of things that aren't even like discovered by tourists, right? That are really, really, really cool. I think if you're going to try and find the equivalent in Africa, you're going to struggle to find really, really cool things that aren't discovered by tourists that you can actually visit. Because of course there are these jungles and stuff, but I mean, they're going to be kind of sketchy to go visit them. I actually included, I wrote an article that's on this topic on, you know, the pros and cons of traveling to South America or traveling to Africa. I put the link in the description, and I go through way more details of specific countries, specific recommendations. You can check that out. And if you found this video interesting, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.